the 10th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Some Pharisees came, and to test Jesus, they asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" Jesus answered them, "What did Moses command you?" They said, "Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her." But Jesus said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, he wrote this commandment for you. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. And for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." Then in the house, the disciples asked him again about this matter. He said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." People were bringing little children to him in order that he might touch them. And the disciples spoke sternly to them. But when Jesus saw this, he was indignant and said to them, "Let the little children come to me. Do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs. Truly I tell you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child will never enter it." And he took them up in his arms, laid his hands on them, and blessed them. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. So Peter and I were having a conversation on the way to church today. And that conversation was about context. About how when you enter into a story in one direction or another, it can seem like different things. He was talking about a class in which they were talking about particular words that were used. That if you use a word one way and you used a word another way, they could have different meanings. One example might be when we use the word charity. And if you use the word like 60 years ago, it would mean one thing. And you use it today, it means another. Different things like that. So I was thinking about the phrase, walking on eggshells. Because that phrase can mean different things to different people. Peter, I mentioned that his birthday was the 4th of October, 16 years old now. How that happened, I don't know. Well, I do know, but it still happened really too fast. But when Peter was born, when children are born, when you babysat somebody, you know what that feeling of walking on eggshells means. The baby is lying in the other room, and you want to make sure, maybe pre-monitor stage, maybe pre-video monitor stage, you don't hear the baby. And so you're like, I've got to make sure that the baby is still sleeping. So you tiptoe or you walk on eggshells to make sure you don't wake the child. Because nothing is worse than a child woken in the middle of his nap. So you walk in, you make sure, okay, they're still sleeping. Which is silly, because if they're awake, you know it. But you still play the game of walking on eggshells to make sure that the child is sleeping. So there's that phrase. That's one way we can hear walking on eggshells. Then the other way is if you've ever been in a relationship that has not been very healthy. It could be a parent, it could be a significant other, it could be fill in the blank. But that feeling of when you were walking on eggshells, where you walk in from a day of work and you walk in and you don't know what you are going to get. So you walk in on eggshells, and it's a whole different feeling, a whole different meaning of that word. I bring that up because we hear this gospel lesson and we cannot help but be drawn to the topic of divorce. You know, it's when the pastors were talking and we're talking online, we have a forum on Facebook, and we go, oh, it's the gospel about divorce! Yay! And we preach on the soul. No. But you start thinking about it. And when I read this gospel lesson, I think it's kind of like how we approach, whether we're walking on eggshells, very carefully, because we don't want to wake someone, because it's out of love and out of caring, or if we walk on eggshells because we're afraid of punishment. When we come to this text, a lot of it has to do with how we view our God. If you view God as a God that is going to smite you because of everything you've done wrong, we might view this text as complete guilt and shame and hurt, which I'm right there with you, because we hear that and it can get us right in the heart. Whether you've been divorced yourself, whether you have parents that have been divorced, whether you have friends that have been divorced, that ripple effect, we know the hurt. So you've got that. If we view God as a God of smite and anger and pain, we can view it as walking on eggshells, like, I don't want to make God mad. But what if we view God as a God of grace and love and compassion? A God that lifts up the vulnerable, lifts up the brokenhearted, lifts up the weak. A God that approaches us out of care and forgiveness and grace. And we read this text. It doesn't completely remove the hurt. It doesn't completely remove the shame, because we are really good at pouring that upon ourselves. But if we hear this text coupled with the text of the children, which I don't think Mark puts them together on accident, when we hear about a God that lifts up the child, lifts up the weak, lifts up the vulnerable, and says, you are mine, then we might be able to approach this text in a little bit different way. First of all, the Pharisees have come to Jesus to test him, to set him up. Let's give you this question. And Jesus lays out, asks them the question. As a good rabbi always answers a question with a question. As the rabbi said, Rabbi, why do you always answer a question with a question? And the rabbi says, oh, do I? And here in the same way, when Jesus is asked this question, Jesus says, okay, tell me what the law says. And they say, the law says that a man can give a certificate of divorce and dismiss his wife. That's what the law says. Then when Jesus is in his house with the disciples, and the disciples ask him again, Jesus adds something. And to us, we hear this and we think, we just kind of go over it. Jesus adds, and if a woman divorces her husband. Now, we can hear it with the same hurt and the same pain because we are all in the same boat. But you see, when Jesus says that, that wasn't a possibility. That could not happen. Because at this point, the woman was still property. The woman couldn't write a certificate of divorce and say, I'm out of here. You see, for the law, if the man was to write a certificate of divorce and give it to his wife and she was sent off, she was left to fend for her own. Hopefully, if by some grace of God her family took her back in, then maybe. Or if she had a brother that would help her out and take her in. But when that letter was written, she became vulnerable, she became weak, she became cast off for society. The child seen is only half human because they haven't started to pull their weight yet. When Jesus lifts them up and says, "You are my child." You see how if we view God as a God of grace, we might start to see this story a little bit differently. This does not erase pain. This does not erase hurt. This does not erase the shrapnel effect that broken relationship has around us. But it gives us a way through, a way in, a way to see a God that holds us up and lifts us up in the midst of hurt and pain. Mike Iaconelli tells a story about his child. And this was in a time, he's downstairs and his child is sleeping upstairs and there's a thunderstorm. There's a thunder and lightning storm and it starts to shake the house. You know the kind. We get it somewhere here, but if you've ever been in Minnesota or in the plains where tornadoes can come, you know when they shake the house. And the lightning, maybe you've got sheet lightning that is just lighting up the sky. And Mike Iaconelli talks about how he is terrified of lightning. He is terrified of thunderstorms. And this house is shaking. And all he can think is he needs to get upstairs because his kid is napping and the kid is going to be terrified. So he runs up to the top. He runs the stairs. He gets up to the top of the stairs, and at the end of the hallway, right next to his child's room, there's one of those picture windows. You know, the kind that go out and you can actually sit. I don't know what those windows are called, but they're a bay window. You got the bay window, and you can sit, and it's the kind where, you know, if you're going to sit, if you're going to put up a Christmas theme or a Halloween theme, if you've got all these things laid out, but it's there, and he gets up to the top of the stairs, and his son is standing on there, and his hands are against the window like this, and of course Mike's heart is just pounding out of fear, and he's there, and the lightning flashes, and his son turns and looks and says, "Dad, God is taking my picture!" And at that point, Pastor Iaconelli realizes just how much of ourselves we put on God. We have pain. We have brokenness. We have been touched one way or another by broken relationship, however that happens, and this is not to diminish that pain. But know that does not stop God from loving you. That does not stop God from welcoming you into God's arms and saying, "You are my child." That does not stop you from coming to this table and receiving body and blood grace for the journey. That does not stop us from being sent into this world and saying, if God can love me, God can love anybody. God cares for the brokenhearted. God cares for the vulnerable. God cares for the weak, the lost, and the hungry. What that means is that God cares for you. And if that isn't a definition of grace, I don't what is. God cares for you.